impact, the liminal space, etc. This is very difficult to simulate because in our training environment, um, we are so much busy with immersing the participants
Sure.
into the simulation because they always can think like on the streets we don't do it like that, and this is
Right.
not real. And do you have any experiences with that and some advice for us trainers now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth. I think if you're trying to design simulation that, and I'll say, there are lots of people that are way smarter than I am about simulation. So I'll give some thoughts on this with an asterisk, right? But like, if you're trying to design simulation that incorporates some of these elements, I think it's worth probably calling out some of these elements ahead of time to discuss with people. Like, hey, we're going to do a simulation. That simulation is going to have factors like uncertainty. We're going to add or subtract pressure to you. We're going to adjust the dial on what sort of an impact we want to have you face, right? So you can imagine, like I often use the wedge model as an idea for this, right? So high wedge scenarios are full bore, high impact, uncertain, lots of pressure, liminal, and ultra complex. And low wedge environments have some, but not all of those features. And they're often proxies for these high wedge environments. So you could imagine, let's say we're doing a skill like intubating, right? So you could imagine having a low wedge environment where you purposefully dial down the impact. You say, look, we're going to have you train this, but it's going to be on a mannequin. So we're going to make you stressed. We're going to start the clock. And once you start, you can't stop and ask questions. You have to keep going. We're going to model that liminal component to it. And you either succeed or fail. You have no redos, but you don't kill an actual person if you get it wrong, right? You kill a mannequin, which is always the right thing to do, right? Train on the mannequins and, and then work on the people. So you can model different components of it like that, I think. But being aware of that's what you're aiming for, and then purposely creating scenarios that are probably focused on one or two of those points, I think is really effective.
Before Ruben goes on with his story again, I want to ask you, what is your experience with training, and especially with stress simulation training as a participant?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you get into the flow, and what do good trainers
Oh,
do?
I loved it. I mean, I pretty early on in my training, I decided, and I think this is an important and individual decision, I decided to take simulation really seriously because I had some experiences that I didn't feel like I could live up to my potential when I was seeing patients. And I knew this was my best way to become a better doctor and to become a better practitioner. So I decided I would take it really seriously. And not everybody decides that, right? Some folks like to laugh it off and they like to sort of
Yeah.
play it off and they like to highlight where it's not real. And like you have to have an active suspension of disbelief as you're doing it because you'll get much more out of it. So I chose to jump into it.
Yeah.
I also was super lucky. I trained at Mass General and the Brigham, which are amazing institutions in the States. The Brigham in particular has this sim center called the Stratus, which is like unreal cool. And they pulled all sorts of ridiculous tricks on us, right? Like telling us we were doing a simulation for a generic patient with chest pain, and then in the background hiring dozens of students to come in running in covered in bloody paint because there was a mass casualty we weren't prepared for, and really forcing us to sort of like make these decisions. I don't want to tell all of the stories because I think they still do one of the particular sims, and I don't want to give it away if anybody listens to this because it was such an important part of my training to think through that particular one. But they would throw curveballs all the time, right? And as a result, you got used to solving problems under pressure in front of people.
Yeah.
It was also the expectation that the more junior members of the team would take the lead in sim, and the more senior people would actually play the roles often of the support staff. So you would always have a chance to play up when you were simulating. And I think I got a ton out of that. Like I really felt very lucky for that training.
Yeah. Ruben,
Yeah,
you're with us again.
and
You were about to tell about a recent medical performing under pressure moment, or a recent. What is recent? But
Tough crowd.
off crowd again. I think he's performing under pressure right now because he wants so.
But the more challenging in emergency medicine is the uncertainty, then also mentioned, where you don't have any clue what's happening, and that's more challenging, even more challenging than a pediatric cardiac arrest. Sometimes, colleagues always says, the CPR situation is an algorithm you have to follow.
Sure,
it's of course there are some emotional challenges around, but the one in a car accident with a minor neck pain, that's more difficult. Do I let him go to home or bring him to the hospital? And that sometimes I was in my bed and thinking, oh, maybe I have to present him to the hospital. So that gives sometimes afterwards more pressure than the pediatric card.
Yeah, I think part of what you're saying is that uncertainty and stress are related but different dimensions, right? Like there's things that provide stress and cognitive load to us because they're just so uncertain. And then there's things where you're right, the certainty is very high, the uncertainty is very low, but there's other factors that contribute to it that make it such a stressful thing. And it's I think it's incorrect to say that those are always tracking with each other, for sure.
And Ruben, and now we have built this training program for your colleagues. We started with ambulance personnel, and now there is also the 21-hour shift. This is for, how do you call it, medical specialists, like anesthesiologists, intensivists, emergency medicine doctors. And we work on 3 parts, on task regulation, self-regulation, and co-regulation. But the self-regulation part, maybe because of its history within the police and military, has gotten the most attention. And then besides that, Ruben, his organization, is also doing a lot of CRM training for the soft skills and communication skills and leadership skills. This that part is covered also. But in our training, we do a lot of self-regulation training. And I mailed you like self-talk, like micro goals, breathing strategies, and so on. And Ruben, do you have a question for Dan about our training approach that you would like to discuss?
Yeah, certainly. Dan explains that you have to jump in, and I think that's not a problem, but that's a challenge for us as trainer. You can do all kinds of simulations, but if the participants don't jump in, of course, all pressure you give it's simulated, so you can easily say, oh, it's not real. But my question to Dan is, how do you get the same contract with your participants like you have? I have to jump in, I want to learn. And of course, you cannot force it, but can you encourage it?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question, right? So for just a second, let's consider the opposite question. What universe would you build if you wanted nobody to take your sim seriously? You wanted them to fail as much as possible, right? Well, okay, you would make fun of them. You would consistently laugh at what happened. You, as the trainers, wouldn't take it seriously. You would repeatedly tell them this doesn't matter. You would set them up for failure both in individual communication and in team communication, right? You would take things they did poorly and you would post it on the wall as, look at this idiot, right? And what they did in simulation. That would produce an environment in which nobody would want to do sim or take it seriously, right? Like you can always make it worse, right? I'm sure we can make it worse. But so if you start from that and then sort of go the other direction, like, well, how would you make it better, right? Well, I think that we're really getting at a systems thing and a team thing. What does the team believe? Not you as the trainer, but what does the team believe the purpose of sim is, right? Do they believe that it's to get them better, or do they believe that they're ticking a box? Okay, so that's not an easy fix where you're like, look, sim is important. It's actually sitting down with folks and being like, hey, what are you working on right now? What are the cases that you're having trouble with? How can I design a system that responds to you and what you need? Right. So one of the first times that I really started taking it seriously, I'd had patient in atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response. And I really didn't do a great job managing them. And so I went to one of my seniors and said, I'm really struggling with this type of a case. And they were like, no problem. Let's go to the sim lab. I'm going to put you through 20 of them. And I was like, oh, whoa, this is really useful. I feel really good about this. And then I was able to share that story with my teammates. And then they all said, oh, okay, well, cool. Let's push forward a little bit harder then, right? Like you're talking about really what is building a culture that takes this seriously, right? So I would totally recommend, if you haven't read it, like The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. I think it's an incredibly interesting book that gets at that building culture idea. But when we think about that, right, we think about like values and rituals. So values are what we say we believe, and then rituals are what we do to back that up. So what are the things you say you believe as a team? What do we believe about training? What do we believe about personal responsibility? What do we believe about the purpose of sim? And then are we actually backing that up? Are we encouraging people to take it seriously? Are we taking it seriously from our end? Are we setting up a space where they have the ability to succeed at it? Because you're right, you can't just tell them to take it seriously. You have to sort of work around this in a corner. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you very much. And maybe another question familiar to that. Some in pressure, some participants feel that we tease them, that so they are hardly get to the point where we need some pressure to learn them instead of teasing them. And how do you deal with that?
Just so I understand the question, you're saying that there's a certain amount of pressure that tends to kick people out of the experience, and a certain amount of pressure that helps people invest in the experience. Am I reading that right?
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah,
I think setting up some conversations ahead of time about that are really important, right? To be like, look, our goal today is to do X. We are going to push you, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. Your job is to be uncomfortable here. So get ready for that. Right now, we're going to go make you uncomfortable, and then afterwards, be like, okay, how are we going to get better at this? Right? And this is work that comes a lot from like Victoria Brazel and Eve Purdy and their team at Bond. Where they think a lot about the relationship between building a psychologically safe environment within which to push people farther and harder and much heavier in order to perform better under pressure, right? It's sort of a funny system to say that like you need to create some safety in the first place in order to then make things slightly less safe. But I think that's sort of what we're saying, right? Is like you want to set yourself up here for success. And so probably that's having conversations about like, look, if this goes right, you're going to feel uncomfortable. Great. Let's make that happen. And then also like taking it seriously, right? Like there's like such an easy way to make it funny. And you sort of have to like not take that low hanging fruit, right? Like I remember sometimes, we would come in and they would have somebody play the voice of the patient, and they would purposely speak in a funny voice or something to make everybody laugh. And I think you're probably doing yourself a disservice when you do that. Like you're easing tension, and that's probably not the point, unless you're doing that at the very beginning for your ultra junior learners and it's their first experience. And you want to be like, look, this room isn't going to hurt you. It's going to push you. But once you get past that, like you should take it seriously. People should be in there on purpose. This is a scarce resource that you are lucky to have. You are damn lucky if you can learn and kill a mannequin instead of a patient. You are so lucky if you get that opportunity. You have to throw yourself into that. And you have to create environments where people can throw themselves into that, and they're not just like goofing around because it's another thing to do, right? Like I feel like if you come out on the other side of this and you have lost patience and you have suffered and you've had sleepless nights where, those ghosts come back and haunt you. Oh my God, would I have rather had that opportunity on a mannequin than on a person, right? Like those people, once they've gone through it, they don't laugh at sim, right? So the trick is, how do you bring that forward and create that environment where you have those conversations at the beginning and people are able to learn cheaply? And this is this entire ethos that I have about never wasting suffering, right? It is our responsibility as trainers who have gone through dirt and who have blood on our hands to help the next generation of people learn more cheaply than we were able to learn, and to learn and to never waste that suffering, right? Like some of that's on us to create that environment where they can do it. I don't know, I'll get off my soapbox. I'm obviously very passionate about this idea because I think this is so important. But
well, this is excellent.
We like that then.
Yeah. And this is also the point where
we have to invest.
Yeah. Sorry, Ruben, go.
Sorry, I like it very much. We have to invest in the starting of a simulation and in culture, and take it very seriously. That are nice lessons. Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Erik,
absolutely.
You want to say also something?
No, this is exactly the point we're at now. And Dan also talked with Brian Willis, and I talk a lot with Brian also about training as an investment, not as a cost. And so we have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. We also and we are now not in the question is not what can we teach, what is valuable knowledge. I mean, even looking at your book, there are so many tools and insights, but the how question is now, how do we get people involved? And how do we speak the language? Also a big part. How do we speak the language of the different groups?
Sure.
And
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everything I said, like, you know, it's not to say that you can't have fun when you're doing this, right? Because this should be like fun and purposeful and interesting. And like, I think if you do it right, you create an opportunity for people to train, to get better as individuals, and to come out saying, wow, that was good. That was really good. Right. And those are like what you should be doing. And so in a way, we're creating a bunch of ambassadors that have a different sense of training than what we got when we were coming through. Right. Like I think about my juniors, when I train them, I hope they leave being like, whoa, Dan made me think. And I want to go have conversations with my other teammates about what they're thinking about. So you're sort of spreading the message that way. Because ideally, how do we get more people involved? We create a situation where there is demand for this as opposed to push for it, right? Teams that ask for this, that want to get better, those teams are prepared, they're ready, they're rearing to go when you start working with them, as opposed to teams that are voluntold to do this, right? Like we're telling them they have to do this. So to create that demand, you know, one, I think you start having conversations around what people are interested in already, right? And you're like, well, what are you trying to get better at? Okay, well, how do you think you could do that, right? What's going to help you get there? I think sharing stories about teams that do this well is crucially important. My teammate at the Mission Critical Team Institute, Claire Murphy, is a brilliant storyteller who focuses on the power of the story to help change culture, right? So she talks about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, the stories we tell as a team about what our identity is, and the stories we tell each other to try to explain and understand what happened, right? Which is essentially what we're doing here. And those are so powerful. And you don't really learn about how to tell stories when you're in medical school, right? You're mostly focused on the drug doses. But I think if we're talking about changing culture and bending culture, which we are, then we also have to invest in like that. We have to invest in the power of story to change culture about it. So that it's not just, sit down, shut up, learn this. It's here's what you're going to face. Here's how we arm you for it. And here's how we empower you to get through it. And thankfully I see that. I mean, I see that culture bending, at least in a lot of the places that I work. So